The Arizona sun hung low over Cedar Ridge, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. Sam Mitchell adjusted his worn leather hat as he tied his horse to the hitching post outside Murphy's General Store. The year was 1887, and the small frontier town buzzed with tension that had been building for weeks like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Sam was a man of few words, weathered by 20 years of ranching in the harsh desert landscape. His ranch sat 15 miles outside town, where he lived alone except for his cattle and the occasional drifter looking for honest work. At 42, he'd learned to read the land, the weather, and most importantly, the mood of men. The deep lines around his eyes spoke of countless hours squinting into the desert sun, while his calloused hands told the story of a life built through hard work and determination. Today, that mood was ugly as a sidewinder's bite. "You hear about what happened at the Henderson place?" Murphy called out as Sam entered the store, the bell above the door clanging ominously. The shopkeeper's usually jovial face was drawn with worry, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged goods on the counter. Sam nodded grimly. 3 days ago, raiders had hit the Henderson ranch, killing old Tom Henderson and stealing a dozen head of cattle. The tracks led toward the Apache reservation. Though Sam knew tracks could be misleading in this country, he'd seen enough false trails during his years in the territory to know that appearances often deceived. "Sheriff's got one of them, Apache. Girls locked up," Murphy continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Claims she knows something about the raid. Town's getting restless, Sam. Real restless." He glanced nervously toward the street, where shadows were growing longer. "Haven't seen folks this angry since the Prescott raid 5 years back." Through the store window, Sam could see men gathering in small groups along the street. Their faces were hard, their voices low but animated. He recognized most of them farmers, shopkeepers, cowhands, decent men pushed to their limits by years of raids, drought, and the constant threat of violence. These were men who'd lost friends, family, livestock to the ongoing conflicts that plagued the territory. "What's the girl's name?" Sam asked, purchasing his supplies with deliberate calm, though his jaw tightened as he watched the crowd growing outside. "Goes by Maria, half-breed, they say. Been living with the Apaches since she was small." Murphy's eyes darted toward the jail, where lamplight flickered behind barred windows. "Some folks are saying she's been passing information to the raiders. Others claim she can speak to them in their own tongue, convince them to stop the killing." Sam had heard rumors about Maria before. The Apache had taken her during a raid when she was just a child. But unlike most captives, she'd chosen to stay with them, even when given the chance to return to white society. Stories varied about her circumstances. Some said she'd been adopted by an Apache family after her parents were killed. Others claimed she'd been traded between tribes. Now at 19, she moved between both worlds, speaking both languages, trusted by neither side. As Sam loaded his supplies onto his horse, he noticed the crowd growing larger. The sun was setting, painting the sky deep orange and purple like blood spreading across canvas. In frontier towns, darkness often brought out the worst in desperate men. Sam had seen it during the war, in the mining camps of Colorado, and in the cattle towns of Kansas. When fear mixed with anger and whiskey, justice became a luxury few could afford. Deputy Williams emerged from the jail, his face pale and drawn. He was barely 25, new to the job, and clearly overwhelmed by the situation. His uniform was wrinkled, his badge tarnished, and his hand shook as he surveyed the growing crowd. Sheriff Morrison had ridden to Phoenix 3 days ago on territorial business and wasn't expected back until tomorrow. "Evening, Mr. Mitchell," Williams called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Quiet night, I hope." The hopeful tone in his voice betrayed his inexperience with frontier justice. Sam studied the young deputy's face, seeing the fear poorly concealed behind a mask of official authority. "That depends on you, son. You got enough men to keep order." Williams glanced nervously at the growing crowd, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. I hope so, sir. The girl hasn't said much. Just keeps asking for water and looking toward the mountains. She speaks English well enough, but she won't answer questions about the raid." A bottle shattered somewhere in the darkness, followed by angry shouts. The sound cut through the evening air like a gunshot, and Sam's jaw tightened. He'd seen lynch mobs before, during the war and in the years after. They started with righteous anger, but ended in something far worse. Collective madness that consumed decent men and turned them into something unrecognizable. "Listen to me carefully," Sam said, stepping closer to the deputy. "Get word to the Apache agent at the reservation. Tell him what's happening here, and keep that girl safe, no matter what. You understand me?" Williams nodded, though his hands were shaking. "Yes, sir. I'll do my best. But Mr. Mitchell, if they rush the jail, I'm just one man." "Sometimes one man is enough," Sam replied, though he knew the odds were against the young deputy. "Just hold them off until help arrives." As Sam mounted his horse, he heard someone shout from the crowd, "Justice delayed is justice denied." The voice was quickly joined by others, creating a chorus of anger that echoed off the wooden buildings like thunder rolling across the desert. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 men now, their faces lit by torchlight, their voices rising in a dangerous crescendo. The ride back to his ranch felt longer than usual. Sam's mind raced as he considered his options. He could stay out of it, protect his own property, and let the town handle its problems. That would be the smart choice, the safe choice. He'd built his life on staying out of other people's business, keeping to himself, avoiding the conflicts that had torn apart so many frontier communities. But as he crested the hill overlooking Cedar Ridge, he could see torches being lit in the street below. The orange flames flickered like angry stars against the darkening sky. And Sam knew that by morning, either justice would be served or an innocent girl would be dead. The thought of Maria, young woman caught between two worlds, neither fully accepted by either, stirred something deep in his chest. He thought of his own sister, Mary, who'd died of fever when she was just 17. She'd been innocent too, full of life and hope, until the sickness took her. Sam had been away fighting in the war, unable to protect her, unable to save her. He'd carried that guilt for 20 years, but tonight, maybe he could do something about it. Sam turned his horse around and headed back toward town, his hand resting on the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant standing alone against a mob, even if it meant risking everything he'd built in 20 years of hard work and careful living. The rope and the reckoning. The torchlight cast dancing shadows on the jail walls as Sam approached Cedar Ridge for the second time that evening. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 men now, their voices rising in a dangerous crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small frontier town. He could smell whiskey on the night air, mixed with dust and the acrid smoke of burning pitch, creating a suffocating atmosphere of impending violence. "Bring her out," someone shouted from the back of the crowd, his voice slurred with drink and rage. "She knows where they're hiding," another voice added, this one belonging to Pete Hawkins, whose cattle had been stolen in a raid the previous summer. "Make her talk." Sam dismounted quietly and tied his horse to a post behind the barber shop, away from the main crowd. The animal sensed the tension in the air, shifting nervously and laying its ears back. Sam needed to assess the situation before acting, to understand the full scope of what he was facing. Through the jail window, he could see Deputy Williams inside, his face pale with terror as he faced the locked door that seemed increasingly fragile against the mounting pressure outside. The crowd had organized itself around three leaders: Marcus Donovan, who owned the largest general store in town and held considerable influence among the merchants; Pete Hawkins, a rancher who'd lost cattle to raids, and whose bitterness had festered like an infected wound; and Jake Morrison, the sheriff's hot-headed younger brother who'd been drinking heavily since the news of Tom Henderson's death broke. Each man represented a different faction of the community's anger, but all three were united in their desire for immediate, violent justice. "Williams," Donovan called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his tie askew, his face flushed with drink and righteousness. "You've got 5 minutes to bring that girl out here. We're going to get some answers, one way or another." Through the jail's small window, Sam caught a glimpse of Maria. She sat on the narrow cot, her long black hair falling over her face like a dark curtain, hands folded in her lap, with a composure that seemed almost supernatural. She wore a simple cotton dress, probably borrowed from one of the town's women, but her posture remained proud, unbowed despite her circumstances. There was something in her bearing that reminded Sam of the Apache warriors he'd encountered during his years in the territory, a quiet dignity that refused to be broken by threats or violence. "She's just a girl," Williams called back through the door, his voice cracking like a teenage boy's. "Sheriff Morrison said to keep her safe until he returns. That's what I intend to do." "Morrison ain't here." Jake Morrison spat, stepping forward, with a rope in his hands. The hemp looked rough and new, purchased specifically for this purpose, and my brother's too soft anyway. This girl's been feeding information to them Apache raiders for months. Tom Henderson is dead because of her treachery. The crowd surged forward like a tide, and Sam knew he was running out of time. Men who might have been reasonable in daylight were transformed by darkness and mob mentality into something primitive and dangerous. He moved quietly through the shadows, positioning himself near the jail's side entrance. If they broke down the front door, he might be able to get Maria out through the back, though that would mean abandoning Deputy Williams to face the mob alone. Inside the jail, Williams was making his last stand. "I won't let you through. She deserves a fair trial, same as any American citizen." "Fair trial?" Hawkins laughed bitterly, his weathered face twisted with years of accumulated grief and rage. "Like Tom Henderson got my prize bull god when they butchered him for sport. You're either with us or against us." Boy, Sam heard the sound of splintering wood as the crowd pressed against the jail door. The hinges were strong, but not strong enough to withstand 50 determined men. Williams was shouting now, but his voice was drowned out by the angry mob. His words lost in the chaos of vengeful voices and trampling feet. Through the window, Sam saw Maria stand up, her chin raised, defiantly, even as the rope was prepared outside. She moved to the small window and looked out at the crowd, her dark eyes taking in the scene with remarkable calm. For a moment, their eyes met across the chaos. And Sam saw something there, not fear, but a kind of resigned dignity that cut through his heart like a blade. This was the moment Sam had been dreading. He could still walk away, disappear into the night, and let events take their course. His ranch was waiting, his cattle needed tending, and he had built a life based on staying out of other people's troubles. But as he looked at Maria through the window, seeing not an Apache raider, but a frightened young woman caught between two worlds she'd never asked to inhabit, his decision crystallized. Like ice forming on a winter pond, Sam stepped into the torchlight, his rifle held at the ready, but not yet aimed at anyone. The weapon was a Winchester 73, well-maintained and reliable. A tool he'd used to protect his ranch and his livelihood for 15 years. "That's enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. The crowd turned toward him, surprise and anger warring on their faces. The torchlight flickered across weathered features, revealing men Sam had known for years. Neighbors, trading partners, fellow survivors of the harsh frontier life. But tonight, they looked like strangers, their familiar faces transformed by the shadows and the collective madness of the mob. Marcus Donovan stepped forward, his torch held high like a banner of righteousness. "Sam Mitchell, should have known you'd stick your nose in this. You always were soft on the Apache, living out there alone, probably trading with them on the sly." "I'm not soft on anyone," Sam replied evenly, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of frontier experience. "But I won't stand by and watch you hang an innocent girl without proof. That's not justice, it's murder." "Innocent?" Jake Morrison laughed harshly, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. "She's been living with them savages for years. She probably planned the whole damn raid herself." Sam's rifle shifted slightly, not quite pointing at anyone, but making his intentions clear. The crowd noticed the movement, and a subtle shift rippled through their ranks. "You have any proof of that, Jake? Any witnesses? Any evidence besides the fact that she's Apache?" The crowd murmured angrily, but no one could answer his question. Sam pressed his advantage, his voice growing stronger. "Tom Henderson was a good man, and he deserves justice. Real justice. Not this lynch mob nonsense." "Get out of our way, Sam," Donovan warned, his merchant's instincts recognizing the dangerous shift in the crowd's mood. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me plenty," Sam replied, his eyes scanning the crowd. "And it should concern every man here who believes in law and order." Then Jake Morrison raised his pistol. "Last chance, Sam. Walk away." Or the shot came from the darkness behind the crowd, followed immediately by a second and third. Chaos erupted as men dove for cover, torches scattered, and horses reared in terror. Sam used the confusion to move toward the jail's side entrance, but strong hands grabbed his arms. "Now!" someone shouted. While they're distracted, Sam fought against his captors, but there were too many of them. As he struggled, he heard the jail door splinter and crash open. Williams's voice rose in a final, desperate protest, before being cut short by a heavy blow. The last thing Sam saw before a rifle, but connected with his skull, was Maria being dragged from the jail, her eyes meeting his for one brief, terrible moment before darkness claimed him. The midnight rescue. Sam awoke to the sound of rain pattering against his face and the acrid smell of smoke in his nostrils. His head throbbed where the rifle butt had connected, and his vision swam as he struggled to sit up. The jail door hung open, Splintered wood scattered across the threshold. "Deputy Williams," he called out, his voice hoarse. A groan answered him. From inside the jail, Sam stumbled to his feet and found Williams slumped against the wall, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The young deputy was alive, but barely conscious. Where is she?" Williams mumbled, trying to focus. His eyes, Sam's blood ran cold as he looked around the empty jail cell. Through the broken doorway, he could see the remnants of the mob's torches, scattered in the muddy street. The rain had started sometime during his unconsciousness, turning the dust into treacherous mud. "How long was I out?" Sam asked, helping Williams to his feet. Don't know," Williams replied, leaning heavily against the wall. "They took her toward the old hanging tree. Said they were going to make an example." The hanging tree stood on a hill overlooking the town, an ancient oak that had been used for frontier justice since Cedar Ridge's founding. Sam had seen 3 men hanged there in his 20 years in the territory, all of them properly convicted by a judge and jury. Sam grabbed his rifle and checked the loads. "Can you ride?" Williams nodded shakily. "I think so. But Sam, there were 40 men in that mob. You can't fight them all." "Watch me," Sam growled, stepping out into the rain. The storm had scattered the crowd, but Sam could see lights moving toward the hill. He mounted his horse and rode hard through the muddy streets, his mind racing. If he was going to save Maria, he needed to reach the hanging tree before the mob could complete their grisly work. The rain fell harder as he climbed the hill, washing away the torch smoke and turning the path treacherous. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, momentary clarity, showing him the crowd gathered around the massive oak tree. They had Maria standing on the back of a wagon, the rope already around her neck. Her hands were bound behind her back, but her head was held high, showing no fear even in the face of death. Jake Morrison held the rope, while Marcus Donovan delivered what sounded like a speech about justice and civilization. Sam dismounted and moved through the trees, using the storm as cover. He could hear fragments of Donovan's words carried on the wind. Example to all who would betray their own kind. Justice for Tom Henderson. Protection of our families. The crowd was smaller now, reduced to about 20 men by the storm and the sobering reality of what they were about to do. Some looked uncertain, shifting uncomfortably in the rain, but the core leaders remained resolute. Sam positioned himself behind a large boulder, about 50 yards from the tree. He had one chance, maybe 2 shots before the crowd would rush him. He needed to make them count. "String her up," Jake Morrison shouted over the thunder. "Let's finish this." Sam aimed carefully at the rope above Maria's head and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out across the hilltop, the bullet severing the rope cleanly. Maria dropped to the wagon bed as the crowd spun around in confusion. "Sam Mitchell," Donovan roared, peering into the darkness. "Show yourself, you coward." Sam's second shot took the hat clean off Donovan's head, sending the merchant diving for cover. The crowd scattered, seeking shelter behind rocks and trees, as lightning illuminated the battlefield. "This ends now," Sam shouted, emerging from behind the boulder with his rifle reloaded. "Anyone who wants to continue this can face me man to man." Jake Morrison raised his pistol, but Sam was faster. His third shot took Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying into the mud. The younger Morrison fell to his knees, clutching his wounded arm. "Next man who draws on me won't be so lucky," Sam warned, scanning the crowd with his rifle ready. The fight went out of the mob like air from a punctured balloon. Without their leaders, faced with a determined man who'd already proven his shooting skills, the remaining men began to slip away into the storm. Sam moved quickly to the wagon, where Maria still lay, her hands bound and the severed rope around her neck. He cut her bonds with his knife, helping her to sit up. "Are you hurt?" he asked, speaking slowly in case she didn't understand English well. Maria looked at him with those same intelligent dark eyes he'd seen through the jail window. "I am unharmed," she said in accented but clear English. "You came back for me. Why?" Sam helped her down from the wagon, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Because it was right. Can you ride?" She nodded, and Sam whistled for his horse. As they mounted together, Maria spoke again. "The men who killed Tom Henderson. They were not Apache. They were white men dressed as Apache, riding stolen horses." Sam's blood chilled. "You're certain?" "I saw them from the hills. I was coming to town to trade when I heard the shooting. I hid and watched them ride away. They spoke English, and one of them was missing 2 fingers on his left hand." Sam thought of Jake Morrison's wounded hand, but then remembered seeing all 10 fingers when the man had held the rope. Someone else then. Someone who'd been content to let an innocent girl hang for their crimes. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Sam said, spurring his horse toward the path down the hill. "The storm won't keep them away forever." As they rode through the rain toward his ranch, Sam realized that saving Maria was only the beginning. The real killers were still out there, and now he had made himself a target by defying the mob. But for the first time in months, he felt like he was fighting for something that mattered. Behind them, the hanging tree stood empty in the storm, its branches reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Justice had been delayed, but it had not been denied. Dawn of truth and new beginnings. The storm had passed by the time Sam and Maria reached his ranch, leaving the desert air clean and sharp with the scent of sage and wet earth. Sam's modest adobe house sat in a valley surrounded by red rock formations, isolated but defensible. He'd chosen this location carefully years ago, valuing privacy and the ability to see anyone approaching from miles away. Maria sat quietly by the fireplace, wrapped in one of Sam's old blankets, her dark hair still damp from the rain. She'd said little during the ride, but Sam could see her watching him with curious eyes as he prepared coffee and checked his weapons. "You don't have to stay," Sam said finally, setting a steaming cup before her. "I can take you to the reservation in the morning, or to the territorial capital if you prefer." Maria wrapped her hands around the warm cup, studying his weathered face. "Where would you go if you had to leave everything behind?" The question caught Sam off guard. "I don't know. Maybe California. Maybe further north." "Then we are both homeless," she said simply. "The Apache do not fully trust me because I was born white. The white people want to kill me because I lived with the Apache. There is no place for someone like me in either world." Sam settled into his chair across from her, understanding more than he cared to admit. "You said you saw the real killers. Tell me everything." Maria's eyes grew distant as she recalled the memory. "I was trading with Mrs. Patterson in town 3 days ago. She needed help with her garden, and I knew which plants would grow in this soil. I was riding home when I heard gunshots from the Henderson place." She paused, sipping her coffee. "I climbed the rocks above the ranch to see what was happening. 3 men on horseback were driving away cattle. They wore Apache clothing and had painted their faces, but they moved wrong. They sat their horses like white men, and they spoke English when they thought no one could hear." "You're certain about the missing fingers?" "The leader, yes." He took off his glove to reload his pistol. His left hand was missing the small finger and the one next to it. An old injury, healed white. Sam's mind raced through the faces of every man in Cedar Ridge, trying to recall who might have such an injury. Then it hit him. Marcus Donovan always wore gloves, even in the heat of summer. He claimed it was because his hands were scarred from a childhood accident. "There's something else," Maria continued. "They drove the cattle toward the reservation, but then they turned south toward the border. I followed them for a few miles before losing their trail near Devil's Canyon." Devil's Canyon was notorious bandit country, a maze of rocks and hidden passages that had sheltered outlaws for decades. If the stolen cattle had been driven there, it meant this was more than a simple raid. It was organized rustling, using anti-Apache sentiment to cover their tracks. As dawn broke over the desert, Sam made his decision. "We're going back to town, but not to surrender to find the real killers." Maria looked at him with surprise. "That is dangerous for you. You have already made enemies by saving me." "I've been making enemies my whole life," Sam replied grimly. "At least this time it's for a good cause." They rode into Cedar Ridge as the sun climbed toward its zenith, the streets still muddy from the storm. Sam noticed how people stared at them, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. Word of the previous night's events had spread quickly through the small community. Their first stop was the doctor's office, where they found Deputy Williams getting his head wound treated. The young lawman's face lit up when he saw Maria alive and unharmed. "Thank God," Williams breathed. "I thought for sure, ... when I came to and found you both gone, ... We need to talk to everyone who was at the Henderson place after the attack," Sam said, "and I want to examine the bodies." Williams nodded, though his face was pale. "The undertaker's got Tom Henderson laid out, but Sam, you should know Jake Morrison's been telling everyone you're working with the Apache. Says you're a traitor to your own kind." "Let him talk," Sam replied. "Actions speak louder than words." They spent the morning reconstructing the attack, interviewing witnesses, and examining evidence. Tom Henderson had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the back. The angle of the wounds suggested he'd been running when the second shot was fired, running toward his house, not away from it. He was trying to reach his rifle, Sam realized, studying the scene. Which means the attackers came from the east. From the direction of town, Maria nodded. Apache would have approached from the west, from the desert. They know the land better and would not risk being seen from the road. As they investigated, Sam began to notice something troubling. Several of the men who'd been most vocal about hanging Maria the night before were now nowhere to be found. Pete Hawkins had supposedly ridden to check on his cattle. Marcus Donovan had closed his store and gone to visit relatives in Phoenix. And Jake Morrison, despite his wounded shoulder, had disappeared entirely. It's like they don't want to be questioned, Williams observed. Or they're afraid their stories won't hold up. Sam replied grimly. The breakthrough came when they visited the Patterson Ranch, where Maria had been working before the attack. Mrs. Patterson confirmed Maria's story about trading and helping with the garden, but more importantly, she mentioned seeing 3 unfamiliar riders heading toward Devil's Canyon the day after the attack. They were driving cattle, she said. Looked like Henderson's brand, but I couldn't be sure from the distance. One of them was wearing gloves on such a hot day. Struck me as odd. Sam felt the pieces clicking into place. Mrs. Patterson, did you notice anything else unusual about the riders? She thought for a moment. The one with the gloves, he was giving orders to the others. And his horse. It was a fine animal, better than what most cowboys could afford. Bay gelding with white markings on the front legs. Sam's blood ran cold. He knew that horse. It belonged to Marcus Donovan. We need to get to Devil's Canyon, Sam said, as they rode away from the Patterson Ranch. But first, we need backup. They returned to town and found that Sheriff Morrison had finally returned from Phoenix. The older lawman listened grimly as Sam, Maria, and Williams recounted the events of the past few days. Marcus Donovan, Morrison, said finally, shaking his head. I've suspected him of dealing in stolen goods for months, but I never had proof. If what you're saying is true, there's only one way to find out, Sam said. We ride to Devil's Canyon and see what we can find. The posse consisted of Sheriff Morrison, Deputy Williams, Sam, and 2 trusted townsmen who'd remained neutral during the lynch mob incident. Maria insisted on coming as well, despite Sam's protests. I know the way to where I lost their trail, she said, and I can identify the men if we find them. Devil's Canyon was a 3-hour ride south of Cedar Ridge, a labyrinth of red rock formations and hidden passages that had sheltered outlaws for generations. As they approached the canyon entrance, Sam could see fresh cattle tracks in the soft earth. Recent, Morrison observed, dismounting to examine the prints. Within the last few days, they followed the trail deeper into the canyon, moving carefully through the narrow passages. The sound of lowing cattle reached them before they saw the animals Henderson's stolen herd, along with cattle bearing other brands that had gone missing over the past months. There, Maria whispered, pointing toward a camp hidden in a side canyon. 3 men, just like I saw at Henderson's place. Sam recognized Marcus Donovan immediately, even though he'd traded his merchant's clothes for cowboy gear. Pete Hawkins was there too, along with a 3rd man Sam didn't recognize, probably a hired gun brought in to handle the dirty work. Sheriff Morrison's voice cut through the canyon air like a whip crack. Marcus Donovan, Pete Hawkins, you're under arrest for the murder of Tom Henderson and cattle rustling. The 3 men scrambled for their weapons, but the posse was ready. Sam's rifle spoke first, taking the hired gun in the shoulder. Morrison's shot shattered Hawkins' gun hand, while Williams managed to wing Donovan as he tried to flee on horseback. The fight was over in minutes. Donovan, clutching his wounded arm, glared at Sam with pure hatred. You should have minded your own business, Mitchell. That girl was supposed to hang, and everyone would have been satisfied, except she was innocent, Sam replied. And you were content to let her die for your crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. In addition to the stolen cattle, they found Henderson's personal effects, including his pocket watch, which Donovan had kept as a trophy. More importantly, they discovered ledgers detailing months of cattle rustling operations, with buyers across the Mexican border, as they prepared to transport the prisoners back to Cedar Ridge. Sheriff Morrison pulled Sam aside. You did good work here, Sam. The town owes you an apology for what happened. Sam glanced over at Maria, who was helping Williams secure the prisoners. Some debts can't be repaid with words. The ride back to town was subdued. Word had already spread about the arrests, and a crowd gathered as they arrived. But this time, the mood was defensive and embarrassment, replacing the anger and hatred of the previous night. As the prisoners were locked up in the repaired jail, Sam found himself standing with Maria outside the sheriff's office. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for the first time in days, the town felt peaceful. "What will you do now?" Sam asked. Maria was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Patterson offered me work helping with her garden and teaching her about desert plants. It would be honest work, and she seems kind." "That's good," Sam said. "You deserve a chance to build a life here." "And you?" she asked. "Will you go back to your ranch and your solitary life?" Sam considered the question. The events of the past few days had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. He'd spent 20 years avoiding entanglements, keeping to himself, protecting his carefully constructed isolation. But something had shifted during those moments when he'd chosen to stand up for what was right. "Maybe," he said finally, "but maybe not exactly the same as before." Maria smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Mrs. Patterson says she could use help with her ranch too. Someone who knows cattle and can handle the work. If you were interested in a change." Sam looked around at the town of Cedar Ridge, at the people who were already beginning to nod respectfully as they passed, at Deputy Williams, who was proving himself capable of maintaining order, and at Maria, whose quiet strength had impressed him more than any gunfighter's bravado. "You know," he said slowly, "that doesn't sound like such a bad idea." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years: hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since the war, he wasn't facing it alone. 3 months later, the territorial newspaper would run a story about the successful prosecution of the Donovan cattle rustling ring, and the heroic actions of a rancher who'd prevented a terrible miscarriage of justice. But Sam Mitchell, now working as foreman of the Patterson Ranch, was too busy planning irrigation improvements and teaching Maria to read legal documents to pay much attention to newspaper stories. Some stories, he'd learned, were better lived than told. Maria had found her place between two worlds, serving as a translator and mediator between the Apache reservation and the white settlements. Her unique position, once a source of suspicion and danger, had become a bridge toward understanding and peace. And Sam had discovered that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in standing alone, but in choosing to stand with others for something bigger than yourself. The hanging tree still stood on the hill overlooking Cedar Ridge, but it cast no shadows over the town anymore. Justice, real justice, had finally come to the Arizona territory, not through violence and vengeance, but through truth, courage, and the simple recognition that every person, regardless of the color of their skin or the world they came from, deserved the chance to live with dignity. As Sam watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, he knew he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all those years in his self-imposed exile. Not just peace, but purpose. Not just survival, but something worth living for. The Eon Death's story explores themes of justice, prejudice, and moral courage in the American frontier, showing how one man's decision to stand up for what's right can change not just his own life, but an entire community. The narrative concludes with redemption, new beginnings, and the triumph of truth over prejudice.